Hey Jordan, can you hear me okay? Hello? Hello? Hello, Sandra? Can you hear me? Hello. Good evening. Can you hear me? I can't hear. I hope my audio is working okay. Let's see. Hello. All right. I think my microphone's working. I could be wrong. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Ah, I'm glad you can hear me. I was worried you couldn't hear. Ah, good evening. Can you see the screen that I'm sharing? It says study session August 26, 2025. I'm sharing PowerPoint. Hello, Sherry.
Hey, David.
Hey, good evening to you.
Good evening.
All right. We'll give it a couple more minutes to get started if that's okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think Jordan dropped. Can you see the screen I'm sharing? The
Yeah.
PowerPoint? Good, good. Fantastic. I'm on my Mac. I still haven't quite figured out Zoom on my new Mac. So, good evening. This is one of our shorter study sessions, but that gives more time
Test,
for
test, test.
questions. Yeah, I hear you. Gotcha. Anyway, this is one of the shorter ones, but it gives more time for questions and discussion if needed, but or give you a little bit of time back. All right, we probably get started. I think it's got 7:03 here, Eastern time here. And then some people might come in a little bit later. And we also have the recording of it. Sherry, I know with Jordan out here, is there anything you wanted to mention before we kick off?
It's the only thing. Thanks everyone for joining. David's been doing this awesome study series, and we're gonna keep these rolling out every month. So yeah, thank you, David.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. I'm really glad to do these. I enjoy these, and it's also good for my professional development. Keeping in fact, my CBAP renews again this December, so volunteering to do these sessions is also helps me. Very similar to anyone who's studying for that. Once you do that, you still have to do it. So teaching and going over these topics, I love doing these too because quite honestly, I learn something every time I talk about these, or remember, it helps me remember something that I should be doing on a day-to-day basis or something. So welcome to this night's session.
Test.
Trista,
We can hear you,
we
Tristan.
hear you. Gotcha. Hopefully you can hear us. But yeah, let's dive in. Yes, as Sharon mentioned, we are doing these study sessions. This month, well, a couple months ago, we started back at the beginning. We did a session on certification overview. If you're interested in business analysis certifications, we talked mostly about the IABA certifications because we're the IABA chapter here in East Tennessee, but we also talked a little bit about the um, Project Management Institute's uh, PMBA certification. And that's a really good. We talked about that to get going on people who were interested. A lot of people, are interested in not only just learning a little bit more about business analysis and way the BABOK is set up and the great information that's in that, but also interested in studying for those certifications. And one thing with these study sessions is having gone through it, I've learned a little bit. I've talked to a lot of other people that have been through the certification exams as well. So I try to plug in little tips and tricks or study guide tips that you might be helpful as you go along. So um, my name is David Thompson, and I've been teaching these sessions for a few years now. I live and work in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm the past president of the East Tennessee chapter of IIBA. And as you can see on the screen, I've done a few certifications for IIBA, most notably the CBAP and the CPOA, Certified Product Ownership Analysis, AAC, which is the Agile Analysis Certification. And I've got a couple still that are from the Scrum Alliance. I think I have to renew those again this year. But yeah, the Certified Scrum Master and Certified Scrum Product Owner. But yeah, so I don't really love taking certification exams, but I've got a little bit of experience doing that. So I'm happy to give a little information about that. I will tell you, as I mentioned before, we started off with a certification overview a couple months ago, and then we started right at the beginning of the BABOK, where we talked about business analysis concepts and key concepts, as well as BAPM, which is business analysis planning and monitoring, the first knowledge area that is listed in the BABOK. This month, August, we are talking about elicitation and collaboration, which is the next knowledge area in the BABOK. Planning for in September, I should say, I'm getting my months mixed up. In September, we're planning to do a session on requirements lifecycle management, RLCM as they call it. And that's even the next knowledge area in the BABOK. But in October, we're going to take a little bit of a detour and talk about product ownership analysis. So anyone who might be interested in either working more with product ownership in your organization, or just being part of a team that has a product owner, or maybe interested in getting that CPOA certification. that's what we'll cover in our October session. So look for that. So yeah, let's dive into this topic. The BABOK is the basis for everything we'll be talking tonight. This is a slide I reuse on all my studies study sessions because definitely the BABOK is what we're basing our discussions on tonight. The BABOK in a lot of from a perspective of IIBA and the business analysis community, and especially if you're interested in IIBA certification, the BABOK is really what you should put your mindset into. I've also supplement some of the things I've learned when I was doing my CBAP certification. The Watermark Learning CBAP Certification Guide is a really great guide. It helps to kind of distill and restate a lot of the topics, has a lot of great examples in it of what's in the BABOK. Definitely is not a replacement for the BABOK, but it is a good tool to utilize if you are planning, especially just to take either the CCBA or CBAP certification exams. So I show this slide by way of telling you that some of the things you'll see tonight, well, definitely the stuff in the BABOK is what we're going over, the topics, but enhanced and some study tips from the Watermark CBAP certification. So let's dive in. Elicitation and collaboration. I think I say this about every knowledge area. It's one of my favorites. When a lot of people think about business analysis and what business analysts do, they say, oh, they gather requirements. Yeah, gathering is not always so easy. Sometimes it is easy. Oh yeah, they're already documented somewhere, or it's a matter of going out and picking them up because they're laying around. That rarely happens. But a lot of time it's elicitation. If you look at the definition of elicitation, it's the act of drawing out or bringing forth emotions, opinions, and facts. A lot of times requirements are full of emotions or full of opinions and full of facts, and you need to help working with your stakeholders, help define what the real requirements are. You need to elicit what is needed to be done. So it's really rarely a matter of gathering requirements. So elicitation and collaboration is chapter 4 in the BABOK, and that really means something. And it's not just a reference to help you find things, but when you are looking at how things are laid out, you'll see that a little bit more as we dig into the inputs, tasks, and outputs. A lot of people call it E&C because elicitation and collaboration is a mouthful. So you might hear people refer to E&C. Yeah, the big thing about elicitation and collaboration is helping you to get information from stakeholders and verify the results. It's not just a matter of getting the information, but also working with those stakeholders to identify what their desirable outcome is and verifying those results. And we'll talk a little bit more about what some of those tasks are. Key thing, especially the BABOK says, is elicitation could be formal or informal. It could be a matter of a survey, or it could be just a matter of a conversation. There's a lot of different techniques that we'll talk about that can be used for elicitation. And elicitation is an ongoing activity. I've been on several projects where somebody says, when are we going to know all the requirements? There's some point you feel like, well, they're fewer and far between, but the more especially if you're in a technology project, the more feedback you get. And the way a lot of projects are today and worked in an agile method where you're building something very quickly, getting feedback, making changes, building a minimal viable product, and then adding on to it as time goes by. You're kind of eliciting the whole way through. Let's see, did I jump way far ahead? I jumped way far ahead. Sorry, that's me and my happy mouse here. So yeah, collaboration. I think we all collaborate every day. That's a key part of what we do. Working with someone to produce or create a result. These are in orange here. These are definitions from the BABOK. So these are key to understand, particularly if you're thinking about studying. These very well could be things you want to know deep in your heart if you're planning to take a certification exam. Thinking about certification exam, if you're thinking about the CCBA exam, about 20% of it, last I checked at least, about 20% of the CCBA exam is about elicitation and collaboration, about 26 questions. And then the CBAP exam, it's about 12%. Obviously, the CBAP exam covers a lot more. There are fewer questions on the CBAP exam, if you ever looked at that. There are fewer questions on the CBAP exam, but there are a lot more intense case study type questions on the CBAP exam. So this kind of helps you when you look at the bigger picture of all the topics that are covered. And this is updated at IABA's website if you're interested in taking the certification exam. They'll tell you the percentage of the different knowledge areas that the exams cover approximately. So just something to keep in mind. Let's see. So this is a part where we have a little bit of participation, and I just if you could either via chat or just open your mic and give some feedback on some elicitation techniques that you may use in your current role. Any thoughts on that? And I alluded to a couple earlier. It could be like surveys or interviews or focus groups, things like that. Any thoughts on? Because there's a million different ways, not just the ones that are in the BABOK. Sherry?
Yeah, I just pointed out in the chat that Trista said workshop, and then
Yeah, very
Niamika
good.
said cervix.
Very good. Those are great. Those are great ones. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, I'll bring my next slide up that has some of those listed here, hopefully. Here's just an example. Interviews, definitely. Surveys right there in the middle. That's a great one. Workshops, we call them right here. Also, a lot of people call focus groups workshops. Focus groups are a little more formal. Workshops are always great. I have workshops, I say, hey, we need to have a workshop, and people get all worried because I think the word work is in that, which is what we do every day, right? Work. But different things like data mining, that's a elicitation technique. Obviously, I mentioned interviews, just going and talking to somebody. They can be a formal interview. It could be more just a casual, hey, tell me what you think about, let's say, and forgive me, I always use IT references because my background is IT, business analysis. But yeah, tell us about this new system we're developing. What are some of the things that you really think are key there? And for example, just to see what the requirements are from someone. Document analysis, that's a good one. For example, there could be some documentation that was written about us, maybe a system again, that understanding what the requirements were for that initially. Maybe the system is maybe doing some investigation into why people aren't using the system, and maybe haven't been trained on it. You can do some analysis with any documentation. Prototyping is one as well, where they're like, hey, a lot of teams do this nowadays. It's like, let's put something together real quick and dirty and build a solution. Maybe it's a product. Maybe you're building, a rough version of what you think might be it. Let's get some feedback on this and see what people think of it. See if it actually works. It could be like a proof of concept or something. Mind mapping, let's get on a board and maybe sometimes use a whiteboard or a flow charting software like Figma or any of these charting options, or maybe just even PowerPoint or just a whiteboard or blackboard or post-it notes on a wall even. Put some things out there to go through it and kind of map out what you're looking at. Observation is a good one. Sometimes it takes, whether it's either active observation or maybe some passive observation. I worked for a company that did a lot of that observation, so it was a grocery company, and there were people, for example, the way they stocked shelves. People would monitor them to see how they're stocking the shelves and try to figure out different process improvements of how they're doing that. And they did that without necessarily engaging the person, just letting them do their job and just watching them, and making sure, and taking note of how they're doing things. Observation is a really great elicitation technique. Process modeling. Sometimes you work with some folks that they can talk about their process, but they maybe not haven't thought of it in a point-to-point, end-to-end kind of way. So sometimes that is very helpful with your stakeholders to say, let's talk about this current process that you do. Modeling out a process with just a few boxes, you don't have to be super formal, allows them to visualize and maybe have the opportunity to identify any kind of issues or bottlenecks or redundancies in the process. And that I feel like process modeling can be kind of like the starting point for process improvement. And a lot of times the requirements or the information that's elicited from just a simple exercise like that can be really a revelation for your stakeholders. So it's something to keep in mind as well. Just say, well, I don't think I quite get it. Sometimes it's okay to kind of play like you don't understand it fully. And sometimes I freely admit I don't understand fully until I kind of model something out. That's helpful both for you and the stakeholders. So those are good techniques. Oops, I'm starting to draw on my slide here. Business rules analysis, similar to process modeling. So help me understand these business rules. Maybe taking the business rules and putting them on a spreadsheet, for example, and writing them out. And the different circumstances will help you understand scenarios better, and from that be able to say, yes, this is here's where we can do some improvements, or this is definitely something when we move on into our future state. For example, event storming. This is kind of leftover. This is a little bit older slide. Event storming is more it's kind of very, very similar to process modeling and very similar to mind mapping. It's a technique that a lot of folks, we did a couple of years ago, I think it was, we did a dedicated chapter meeting about this, where event storming is really getting a piece of paper, pasting it to the wall, and getting a bunch of Post-it notes and thinking through a system and all the events that are generated and how they link together and processing them. And they call it storming because you're really very, very, very close to just throwing Post-it notes on a board and then organizing them. It's very revealing to be able to think through things on how events are triggered, and especially if you're doing something like system to system integration or handoffs between systems or boundary systems. It really is helpful to do a technique like that. I would encourage you to look at it. I did make a note that that's not listed in the BABOK. BABOK has 50 total techniques, of which many, many, many are useful in elicitation and collaboration, but something to keep in mind. But it's important, as I mentioned, if you take an exam, to understand all the techniques and when to use them. So that's the key. Well, thanks for your input on that. Let's dig into the details about elicitation and collaboration. And you'll see this if you're familiar with the BABOK at all. Every knowledge area, I had mentioned before, you have business analysis, planning and monitoring, elicitation and collaboration, requirements, lifecycle management, solution evaluation, all the techniques, all the knowledge areas start with kind of this format where you list out the inputs for that particular knowledge area, the tasks that are done within that knowledge area, and then the outputs expected. Sometimes these are really easy to see when you think about it. So for elicitation collaboration, some of the inputs you need in order to do elicitation collaboration is an understanding of what the needs are. So, what are we doing here? Is this an initiative? Is this a project? What am I trying to find out? what does the team have a need for? You also want to know what your business analysis information is. How are we gonna approach this from a business analysis perspective? What are stakeholder engagement approaches? That's something that also could be an input for these tasks in elicitation collaboration. One of the things you do in business analysis, planning and monitoring, the previous knowledge area, is do a stakeholder matrix and do a stakeholder engagement review, and find out who your stakeholders are, how best to engage them, and then a business analysis performance assessment on this will help you determine whether the elicitation collaboration you're doing is up to par with what the expectations are. So, and it's funny, um, these are pretty logical when you think about the task. You're prepared to do elicitation. You do the elicitation, you conduct elicitation, and then you confirm your elicitation results, and then you communicate your information, and then you manage the stakeholder collaboration. So maybe not totally logical in that necessary order, but definitely, as you can see, each of these has a number on them. 4.1, the four, as I mentioned before, chapter 4 in the BABOK is elicitation collaboration. That just helps you identify where these are. If you're studying for one of the exams, it's good to know these. These help you align the inputs, tasks, and outputs. But we'll go through each one of these. So, but the outputs of each of those, preparing for elicitation, is you'll have a plan. If you do the conduct elicitation, you'll have some unconfirmed elicitation results. And then when you confirm your elicitation results, you'll have confirmed elicitation results. Pretty logical. When you communicate your business analysis information, you will have your output is the information you communicated. And then when you're managing your stakeholder engagement, your output will be stakeholder engagement. So, it's a little bit of a stretch to think through these. These are really pretty simple when you think about it. But yeah, so if there are not any questions, we'll just start digging into each one of these tasks. And there are not that many, but let's see, preparing for elicitation. That's definitely something you really want to. If you have a lot of times as business analysts, we're just thrown onto a project. Say, hey, can you go talk to this team and see what they need for this project? We just get thrown in. And I always advise business analysts I work with who ask for my advice. I say, hey, sometimes it's good just to say, hold on a minute, let's go back to square one and think about what we're doing, why we're doing it. The business analysis, planning, and monitoring is really a good key first step. Who are our stakeholders? What are we doing? That helps. Just like preparing for the solicitation. Hopefully you've been able to do some planning, but you're really have a good understanding of what you're trying to elicit, what you're going to cover and what not to cover. And then that helps to keep, the exercise focused on what you really need to focus on. You're not wasting a lot of time. You're not wasting your stakeholders' time either. Figure out maybe some possible techniques. You might think, oh gosh, I've got to interview 500 people. That's impossible. Maybe I'll do a survey. Or, there's just 3 people. Maybe I could just get us all in a conference room for an hour or two and we can hack through this. And well, I shouldn't use the word hack, but we can knock through this and figure this out. Or maybe it's, something, gosh, we need an offsite where we're really focusing, using a focus group, having a real good focus workshop on what we're trying to accomplish here. And think about that. Think about like who's going to participate, what the agenda should be, whether it's offsite, onsite, if it's through Zoom or Teams or whatever. Maybe think about also your stakeholders and, maybe if there are folks that are remote, offshore in Europe, in South America, wherever, they might be, could be time zone considerations. So thinking about that as much as possible, you could feel the need to do more than one or two or even more um, elicitation techniques, maybe a combination to make sure the teams are covered. So, and you get the stakeholders, the correct stakeholders engaged at the right time. It could also be that you say, hey, we're gonna do the East Coast uh, tomorrow morning and the West Coast tomorrow afternoon. Break it up and then maybe find an opportunity to get people together. Whatever that works, but it's key to plan the logistics, do that preparation, identify any kind of supporting materials that you need. I like to. I have a teammate that calls. I need a pre-read on this before this meeting. A lot of people don't do their homework before they have a meeting. And it's key to prepare them and say, hey, really need you to look through this document, or really need you to think about this, or come with this mindset, and be prepared so that we can really dig into this. How many people have had a meeting and invited some folks, and you get there and people are like, why are we here? What are we doing? Oh, okay. Obviously have an agenda, make sure you're prepping those stakeholders and say, need you really to participate in here, really, you know, whether it's, hey, don't bring your laptop or don't open your laptop, or really don't look at your phone. We need your active participation. We need you to review this beforehand. Those are keys to preparing your teammates and your stakeholders for elicitation. A little bit of that preparation goes a long way to make sure you're not, you know, continuing to have to go to the well and ask them for more information. So that's definitely a key to prepping. Conducting the elicitation here, the BABOK tells us there are three types of elicitation. There's collaborative, where folks are working together. You're working directly with the stakeholder. There could be you're doing research, as I mentioned before. Document analysis is something maybe you're digging into to to figure out. Maybe you're looking at what some products are on the market, how they might impact the way your group is working, what some of our options are. Maybe you're doing a little bit of that research on the front end, doing some analysis before you bring the stakeholders in. Experiments could be, as I mentioned before, proof of concepts. Hey, we're going to build this. Um, let's say we're going to build a physical product. Let's mock it up and see what it looks like. This will be a prototype and see how that works. Um, maybe you work for a bicycle company and, hey, we're going to try a new kind of bicycle with 4 tires instead of 3 or 2. Whatever you need to do, experiments. Those are ways to conduct elicitation and get feedback. It's real key that the BA is there to facilitate and be an enabler really for the team. Getting them making sure that you have all the materials you need, whether it's post-it notes or the right location, that you're actively working with the team to make sure that folks are participating, um, and everybody's opinions getting heard, and that you're staying on topic and moving along. That's key. I think a lot of what we do as business analysis professionals is facilitation. We're not there to necessarily um, you know, create the requirements per se. We're there to help guide the team into coming to that revelation and that facilitating the team to make those decisions. And then I like to say this as well, and the BABOK advises us as well, to make sure you get another BA, get help, because you can't be everywhere. If you can get more than one person, they don't have to be BAs, but to help capture and record and make sure the team is engaged, it's always helpful to have multiple folks there that are not necessarily stakeholders, but there to help facilitate. And so you can't be expected to facilitate and take notes at the same time. Luckily, we have technology nowadays that helps us to record and transcribe things that are said, but without that context, a lot of times those transcriptions are not usable, and sometimes the audio doesn't work real well, especially if you're in a big room. And so having someone there that is dedicated to keep track of the parking lot, as they say, any topics that are maybe not necessarily covered that day, anything that needs to be followed up on, or any of the specific revelations or requirements that come out of that text is really critically important. So that's conducting the elicitation. And then, yeah, and this is really key. I say this about every slide pretty much, but sorry. The confirming those elicitation results. Um, I've always, and I've done this myself in the past. Okay, thanks guys, it's great. I got this information and I go off and they don't hear from me for a while. I've been guilty of that in the past and I hope I never do it again. But, you know, it's real key to say, hey, we had this conversation. We spent this 2 hours in a workshop together in a room. This is what we came up with. Can you help me validate this is what we came up with? Did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? In your notes, it's very important to say these are the requirements that came out of this elicitation exercise. These are the keynotes. These are the follow-ups. Did I miss anything? And give the stakeholders the opportunity to confirm those results. They might say, no, hey, we didn't say that. We said this. You're like, oh, okay, I missed that. Sorry. I got this quote here from the BABOK on elicitation discrepancies. Variation in elicitation results are often uncovered when modeling or documenting requirements. That's from the RAD Chapter 7, Requirements Analysis and Design Definition. It's the that comes back to bite you. If you're doing, if you're starting to finalize your requirements analysis and you're starting to define a design for the implementation or the project or whatever you're working on, you'll be like, oh crap, that wasn't actually that wasn't validated. We just heard that. I thought we heard that. Didn't we hear that? And that's not good. You need to make sure that your stakeholders are signing off on them and they agree that with the results that you found. So if you do this at that elicitation and collaboration phase, that will serve you well as you get further on into your business analysis. So those are some key things. And part of that is actually communicating, you're confirming, but you're also communicating whatever it is, whatever ways you want to communicate it. You can do it formally or informally, whether it's, let's get everybody together. We're going to go through what we found when we did our workshop. Here are the requirements that we heard out of it. You're sharing it with them. Maybe you're sending it around in an email. Maybe you have a business requirements document, a BRD. This is what we have. There's a formal document. Maybe you have user stories where you've done it, depending on how your team or your company, your project approaches things. It could be in multiple different ways. It's always good though to have it in some form where it's formal, where people can share it and look at it and sign off on it. And if there are any disagreements or any kind of discrepancies, that those can be understood and that it's communicated. So maybe you put this on a team site or a file share on a server, somewhere where the team can look at it and collaborate. There's nothing really to hide. Usually, it could be more of a confidential project, but typically there's nothing to hide. You want to make sure all your stakeholders have a voice and are able to validate the information and make sure that it's in a place where everybody can take a look at it. So communicating that information is a big part of it as well. And then, you've built a relationship by now with your stakeholders. You understood, if you've done your planning, you've identified who your stakeholders are. Maybe you've identified, we talked about this last month when we talked about planning and business analysis planning. You maybe identified some of their biases, some of their fears, some of their needs, specific needs for their, multiple stakeholders have different needs, different way. When I think about biases, maybe they're like, I don't like, I don't like Windows systems. I like everything to be text-based, or I don't like anything that is open to customers to come in and log into our system. For example, they may not um, may not really like some of the aspects of that. So managing them, working with them, kind of uh, helping understand so that they you manage their expectations on the making sure that you're understanding that they're being heard, that you're also communicating the any other options for them. You're communicating them into a way that uh, you're regularly touching base with them. I've worked with folks that are on the road and they're very hard to get, but always try to check in with them and make sure, hey, here's where we're at on this. Just want to make sure that you have any questions. Maybe they've missed a few meetings because they're busy. Um, keeping them up to date, managing that relationship, just to try to keep it positive. It's an ongoing activity, making sure that the stakeholders can collaborate with themselves as well. One of the things that says poor stakeholder relationships can lead to failure to provide quality information, resistance to change, negative reactions and setbacks, and BA information ultimately ignored. So it's real important, I feel like, from a business analysis perspective, to make sure you're kind of cultivating that relationship with your stakeholders, and that you're communicating with them and raising any risks. Maybe you raise them to the project manager or to the project as a whole, saying, hey, I'm not hearing from this stakeholder, or this stakeholder is really resistant to giving feedback. Um, Making sure that, hopefully you don't get to that point, but making sure that you're really, um, you know, as I said, cultivating that relationship with your stakeholders, and that collaboration is a real key part of that. So those are those key tasks under elicitation and collaboration. And I usually start with this is the BACM. This is the business analysis core concept model. We kind of talk about this. When you're thinking about elicitation and collaboration, you can think about how that fits in the business analysis core concept model. BACM is something you'll see at each of the knowledge areas in the BABOK. And there are, these 6 points that show how that fits. And the next slide will give that information. I usually start with this. I don't know why I've had this at the end of this presentation. Forgive me, but it's always good to think about this as you're going through these. But if you want, I don't have these sorted correctly, but if you want to memorize these, you can remember these key core concept model points by sorting them in this order: value, success, solution, need, stakeholder, change, and context. Vision, success. That's a mnemonic. Some people use that. I actually remembered that one when I took my CBAP, and it was helpful. But nevertheless, if you look in the BABOK, that'll tell you a little bit about that. But this is how we apply that business analysis core concept model to elicitation and collaboration. And as you see here at exam tip, if you're going to take one of the certification exams, CBAP or CCPA particularly, it's good to know how these apply to all of the knowledge areas in the BABOK. But by way of change, when you're thinking about elicitation and collaboration, the change part is you're identifying the change and the stakeholder concerns about it. As I mentioned before, understanding what their motivation is, what maybe their concerns are about the change, and realizing that this is a change to them, and sometimes the changes are difficult. You think about the need, you need to understand what the need is. Sometimes it's a matter of eliciting the need. Sometimes the need can be super high level. Oh, we need this software. Why do we need this software? Oh, because it'll save us time. Okay, how will it save you time? Digging into you heard of the 5 whys. If you ask why 5 times, you usually get to the root of the issue. Well, we need to be first. Well, we need, you continue to dig down to really understand the core needs. That really helps with elicitation. The stakeholders, obviously, in this situation, you're really working with the stakeholders quite a bit. in the core concept model, you're involving them, you're managing their collaboration with them. The value is you're thinking about the value of the information that's gathered. You know, the information, we do elicitation and collaboration, or any of these elicitation exercises, the the data and the information you get from that is really gold if you think about it. Hopefully gold. You know, that's very, very valuable to the success of the initiative that you're working on. So, you know, what you're doing there is where you're not only identifying the value proposition for what the initiative needs, but the value to your stakeholders. And sometimes it's a matter of communicating that value to your stakeholders as well. They may not quite see it, and they may not see it from the perspective, maybe the larger perspective of the organization itself. The context is how you're using those elicitation techniques to identify, is this as the context of the change, or, you know, in what context are we utilizing this? Maybe how are we slicing this, or how are we approaching this? What context is it? And the solution itself, you know, you're maybe not at this point thinking about what the solution is. Hopefully you're not solutioning as you're gathering requirements, but you're thinking about how the elicitation, the information you've gotten through elicitation will be kind of formatted, prepping to help find the appropriate solutions, and maybe some solutions. You know, a lot of us have been on projects where the solution is in front of us. We need to find out how we're going to utilize the solution. Yeah, and we're going to implement it. This is our need is we need to implement this solution that my golf buddy sold me on at the golf match yesterday. And then we have to find a need to justify it. And so your job as business analysts is to justify this solution that maybe the executive has purchased without really thinking through things. So, that rarely happens. So, but anyway, yeah, it's important to think about that back. If you look at any of the other knowledge areas, and we go through this every time we go through one of these study sessions specifically about a knowledge area, we'll review that. And it's good to know these, especially if you're planning to take a test. Let's see, I'll move to this slide. That's all the real data we're covering tonight. Our next study session, as I mentioned, is requirements lifecycle management. That'll be in September. And we don't have a date on that yet, I don't think, but watch for that. It's a good one. Requirements lifecycle management is one of my favorite. I say that about every one of them, but it's one of my favorite knowledge areas. Definitely some great stuff to learn from there. So with that, anybody have any questions about elicitation and collaboration, or anybody want to talk about anything, or maybe even you know, some of your experience with elicitation and collaboration?
It was affirming for me hearing you talk about getting clarity, and still at that point, maybe there were miscommunications initially, because I guess whenever I'm doing elicitation with stakeholders and I miss something at the beginning stage, I guess I feel like I let them down, or like it's on me for not getting 100%. So it was just affirming to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, I think that happens to all of us, really. You know, it's like, and you have to ask, do I have everything? And maybe your stakeholder's tired. They don't want to. No, I'm sure they don't look forward to. They want to move to the next meeting, or they want to get to the end of the day, and maybe they haven't thought through it. And so we can't put that on ourselves. But what we can do is just be available and be, you know, here's what I heard. Does this look good to you? A lot of times you do have to put the onus on them to say, you signed off on this. This is what we heard. You know, you our job isn't to, you know, dig up the world and find every little thing. You know, you need the help of the stakeholders. That's why cultivating that stakeholder relationship is really important. But yeah, confirming those results is really, really key. And I feel that is liberating, really, you know, rather than it being on you and say, okay, this is what I heard. Here you go. Is this right? You know, you're the business expert. You know, this is your area of expertise. Am I missing anything? Do I understand this correctly? I told somebody about a year or two ago. I said, I like being a business analyst because I can be dumb. I can ask the dumb questions. I can say, wait, I don't understand. And I'd say that quite a bit. I'm sorry, I don't understand this. Can you help me? And it's okay to be that person that doesn't understand because that helps you. A lot of times when a stakeholder wants to talk you through that, they start thinking about it in a different way and they think, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know this, as a stakeholder, this is my area of expertise. I can't I can't skip all these little things to help somebody understand. So yeah, I think that's a key part is just making sure that hey, do I have this right? Am I missing anything? That's a key added step. So thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, hi, David, sorry. I had a
Oh, no, it's
question. Yeah, I was working on a project where I joined in the middle and the requirements were already gathered and we're going through
mm,
analysis and design. And when we get to configuration, walkthrough, so the business comes with new business rules
uh,
because initially when the requirements were gathered, they were thinking or looking at things from how the system functions now, but then when they have a better view of how the system works and kind of looking at things from a second pair of eyes, oh, maybe we can do this, maybe we can add these rules to automate things more. And we were working with a third-party vendor, COTS solution, and they kept slapping us with, PCR on every single thing. Now,
mm.
how can we avoid to is there a way to reduce it or minimize that happening? Like if in the future I'm working on a project when I'm gathering requirements, like anything in your experience that would be useful?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on that, and this is very relevant to something I've gone through before. You know, it's a matter of, you know, I mean, think about system replacement. Let's say we have an old system or a current system, the current state, you use it a certain way, and then the new system has new capabilities, new functions, things that maybe it's hard to visualize. I have trouble when I built a house many years ago. Well, I had a house built, I should say. Um, I just couldn't see it. I thought, oh man, this house is going to be small. I couldn't think outside of the blueprint itself. It was hard to think about what that looks like. What I needed to do was go to one that had already been built, the same model, and that helped me kind of see it better. So that said, I think if it's at all possible to do like a prototype or proof of concept to say this is, to get the stakeholders thinking about, oh, we can do it this way. That not always is an easy part because that in and of itself, especially if you're working with a third-party vendor who's an implementation partner, for example, they're they don't they would rather just go to the implementation phase. They don't want to do a proof of concept phase typically, or that could be very costly. So as much as possible, that continuous feedback, particularly through the build process. If you're doing more of an agile approach to the build, you know, bringing your stakeholders in and making sure that they're participating. That doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be new requirements. But if you can do like a prototype phase and as much as possible, allow them to think outside of the box. Don't think so much about your current system. Let's focus on, there could be some core requirements that you have on the current system that get applied to the new system. But, um, you know, let's think outside of the box and really help them to understand what the capabilities of the new system might be. Let's don't think of it, think of the perfect world in this new system and how you would like it versus being stuck in, we wanted to do this, what it's done for 10 or 15 years or whatever in the current system. As much as possible, like I said, a lot of times, at the very least, bringing them along for feedback, continuous feedback during the build process. Hey, tweak that screen, or hey, we want to see that as a drop down instead of a radio button or whatever. That's helpful, but if possible, do a proof of concept or get them as much involved in thinking about that future state as much as possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Hmm? Sure. There's no easy answer for that, I will say.
Yeah.
So, there's no- it's, especially as you said, you dropped in the middle of it. You know, like here are the requirements that somebody got for us. Now why didn't those meet? Why aren't those relevant to the system where they're doing? Well, gee, we had this black box out there that we had no idea how it worked. That sometimes that's a slippery slope, but as much as possible, learning about the capabilities of the new system, um, and maybe getting hands-on as much as possible. UAT is a very valuable. I feel like iterative UAT, user acceptance testing, is extremely valuable because the end users ultimately will be able to give feedback as they're going through it. They're testing, that didn't work. Oh, we actually wanted to see this. And you can go through and say, okay, here are our top enhancements that we want to see on this. Maybe those can be fit in, before you go live. Maybe those are things that are kind of at the top of your backlog, your product backlog, and say, okay, well, I know it doesn't do this right now, but it will after we go live, we'll work on these other things. Sometimes that can be helpful as well. A lot of times it depends on the approach of the initiative, whether it's like a waterfall implementation. Okay, well, everything's in the books already, or it's an agile. Well, we're gonna tweak this as we go along and make it better and better as it goes. Hopefully, more and more initiatives are like that. I'm seeing that over the past few years, more agile approached. Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking.
My
Anybody?
pleasure.
Oh yeah, sure. Anybody have anything else?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Sometime, when it comes to requirement elicitation, some of the stakeholder I work, they're super technical, and then there's a bit of a language barrier involved as well. And when I ask a very specific targeted question, the conversation goes off to like a tangent, like completely. And uh, um, I don't know if you had experience. By the way, I live in Toronto, so I don't know if you had similar experiences, and what would be a respectful way to bring them back to what the focus is, what the purpose of the session is, and how to get it done.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it goes back to the preparation for elicitation exercise. It's not always easy to do that, but as much as possible, particularly if someone who's deeply more technical, kind of prepping them and saying, "Hey, you're very technical, and we appreciate that, and we like that feedback, but um, keep in mind the other stakeholders that will be participating in this exercise maybe not have your depth of knowledge on this. So, I think it just be, I like the idea of just being open and honest and saying, hey, let's try to keep it at a understandable level and don't get down to the molecular level with how everything works. Sometimes you might need to go there. They might help to bring you the clarity. I think it's a matter of also, making very clear what the agenda is, what's in scope and what's not in scope. We're going to talk about this topic at this level. Maybe it might be helpful to say, we're not going to go into the minutia of how, let's say, system to system integration. We're not going to go to the level of the JSON values or whatever, what XML is being transmitted. We're not going to go to that level. We're going to keep it at the very high object level and just identify some key characteristics. As much as you can set those ground rules and say, okay, well, once we've done this and everybody's got and I think this is a phrase I like to use a lot, a common understanding of what it is, keep it at that, there will be opportunities to dig more into this deeper dives, maybe with a subset of stakeholders, if not every stakeholder is needed. But I think establishing those ground rules as much as possible on the front end is a good practice. Doesn't always work, of course. It's hard to keep people from going deep. And a lot of times these sessions, these workshops, to be honest, there'll be people in there that just want to show off everything that they know and like to hear themselves talk. And so you might just have to kind of, as facilitator, kind of let's bring it back up to this level and let's talk about that. That can be a challenge but it's definitely in your role as a facilitator, it's something you might want to. I better work with this person on the front end to make sure that they understand that what's in scope and what's out of scope and where we want to keep it level wise. I think you can do that, and that should be helpful.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, if no other questions, I want to say it's a real pleasure that you guys were able to join tonight. Really, glad to present this topic. I think Sherry, you might know better. We have a recording of this, and also, if you're interested, there you can get credit for this hour that we spent together. If you're interested in the professional development credits with IABA. So if you're thinking about a certification or whatever, or if you're keeping up your certification, definitely you should hear back from our chapter about that via an email sometime in the next day or two. It was very
Thank
nice
you,
to
David.
have y'all. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the evening.
Night.
Take care.
Thanks. Thank you. You too.